The blessings in the opioid crisis. Seeing the perfection in the pain fuels our purpose. We can see that the drugs aren't working and we need a wider angle, a jump out to a different paradigm to witness a solution into this drug opioid crisis. I'm Dr. Dina Churchill, innovator of women's health and wellness. I'm a mother, a chiropractor, a budding astrologist, and a student and teacher of life. But the opinions I'm about to present are my own personal views. They're not representing any association, foundation, school, or group that I hold membership. The literature has deemed this the worst drug crisis in history. It's the leading cause of death, opioid deaths, in the United States in people under 50. In Canada, prescription medication and overdose related deaths eat up about 14% of our health budget. That's $29 billion. We have 12% of our Canadian children ages 6 to 14 that are taking medication, and 26% of our children ages 15 to 24 taking medication. And it's the fastest growing group, our children. So the opioid crisis has been coined an increase in pain-relieving prescription and non-prescription drugs. The solution to the crisis is in seeing the benefit. So I'm going to start by talking about the purpose in pain. I'd like to do a little demonstration that was taught to me by Bill Esteb years ago. And in speaking to an audience about pain, I asked for a volunteer. And the first person that comes up to the stage volunteers is Jed from El Paso, Texas. Now, you know what they say about Texas. Everything's bigger in Texas. The men, the horse, the artificial breasts, and the ego. So I know this is going to be an interesting experiment. But I asked Jed for his hand and I pull back his finger until he says stop, until he asks me to stop. So with Jed, I can almost bring it back to his hand before he says, stop. So I'll say, Jed, can you take this pain-relieving medication, go back to your seat, and then come back in 30 minutes, and we can continue with the experiment. Now, that seems kind of crazy, right? But this physical paradigm can also be put in a mental paradigm, too. That there's a purpose in pain because it helps us identify limits. It's a warning signal that something's not quite right, and it helps us avoid serious injury. For without it, we might have broken Jed's finger. I'll give you another example of pain. After our divorce, one of my sons was feeling rather depressed, and some authorities wanted to use medication, but we looked at how we could help balance his perception because the fact that we were divorced wasn't going to change. But I said, what would give you joy in your life to balance this painful perception? Is there something we could do together? Is there something that you could write or do, or I could get for you, that I could buy for you, something that would bring joy to your life? And he said, well, there is one thing. And I said, what's that? He said, a monkey. A monkey. Okay, let's pretend we can't get a monkey. What's next on the list? So a puggle or a dog, a puppy was the next thing on the list. So we bought Major, and he's been a therapy dog to help balancing all our perceptions for 7 years. So we're grateful for that. But the pain serves a purpose in letting us know there's a problem. We have to ask ourselves why it's there. Well, Jed knew it was me pulling back on his finger, and my son knew it was because of the divorce. So identifying why the pain is there is essential. And then what needs to change? If you can change, stop pulling back on my finger, or if you can't change the divorce situation, looking at ways that you can crisis management, balance your perceptions. So let's just take a look at the science behind pain, just for a moment. So pain, this diagram looks at pain as an emotional perception. So we have different receptors, nociceptors and mechanoreceptors. These are pain or sensory receptors in the skin. So the nociceptor, again, responds to damaging or potentially damaging stimuli, where the mechanoreceptor responds to a pressure or distortion. But those both pathways, whether you're being touched by a feather or being pricked by a tack, come down and come into the spinal cord. This is a cross section of the spinal cord, but come in through the dorsal nerve root ganglia and come over to the spinal thalamic tract and come up into the limbic system in our brain, or the thalamus. So all this is demonstrating is that perception of pain happens in the brain. So whether or not something is pleasurable, a feather, or painful, a tack, it's our brain, it's our thalamus that interprets that, the limbic system. So pain, again, is an emotional perception. It's not just a discriminating a sensation, it's actually an emotional experience from the neurology, from the basic neurology. So this is why, if you look at a previous video I did talking about essential oils, you'll see some of the science behind it. But essential oils, when we smell them, it just has one synapse. It goes into the olfactory receptors in your nose, and there's only one synapse then into the olfactory bulb into this limbic system in your brain where you perceive pain. It's also the emotional center. So a essential oil that I'll talk about in just a second works quicker and has less side effects than pain relieving medication that has to be digested and processed through your system. So again, all I want to know about this diagram is understanding that pain is an emotional perception. Now let's go back to our crisis management. The opioid crisis management. Well, the first thing I have on the list is chiropractic, because chiropractic balances the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. It directly, by removing subluxations through the spinal column or vertebrae, it has a direct effect on those neurons, right, the nerves. But it also, because it affects the central nervous system and our position of our head, it affects our perception of the universe. So it not only acts at a local way, a musculoskeletal, but a neuromusculoskeletal. That's the part that most people forget. It's neuromusculoskeletal discipline, because it affects the nervous system and our perception of the environment. So you can see chiropractic and balancing the nervous system is sort of a foundational piece when we're looking at balancing nerves. Painful nerves, or again, addressing this opioid crisis. Now, there are some chiropractors that are wanting prescribing rights. I would ask you to look at that and to review our foundation, because chiropractic is based on the philosophy that our body holds innate wisdom to heal itself when you remove the obstacles. So even a inflammation, white blood cells, for example, the new research is showing, are sent to an area of injury, and the white blood cells help reorganize the collagen tissue. They're essential part of the healing process. So instead of taking away the inflammation, you may just want to work with it and understand why it's there. So again, working from an inside out, honoring the body's wisdom, our natural health disciplines, chiropractic, osteopathy, maybe homeopathy, naturopathy, and disciplines that work from an outside in process, treating the symptoms and hoping that it's going to change the outside, would be separate. There'd be different disciplines that look at pharmaceuticals. So it's important not to cloud our basic foundation of what chiropractic is, innate wisdom of the body. Mind balancing is another, mindful meditation, and study after study has shown how this affects our painful perception. I just did a process myself on the weekend, and a process that I use with patients or clients, coaching clients, not patients, coaching clients. Chiropractic, something different than that. But my coaching clients, the DeMartini method. So again, it's looking at how to change your perception and balancing the pain and pleasure in your mind, and your perception balances it in your body. And when your mind is balanced, your body's balanced. So again, embracing both pain and pleasure brings you to a place of love and grace and joy and stasis. So mind balancing techniques. Acupuncture. I studied acupuncture in a CU1 hospital in China after I graduated from chiropractic college. And there in the hospital, they are using acupuncture to do surgeries and as an anesthetic, because it affects the nervous system so profoundly. So acupuncture is another management tool. Herbs, spice, and enemas. You know, there's white willow bark and turmeric and cloves and all sorts of natural healing and pain relieving modalities in herbs and spice. And coffee enemas. Coffee enemas were used in World War II. Right up until 1977, it was even in the Merck Manual, the medical Bible, as a pain relieving tool. So these are natural things that you can do without any side effects that honors the natural innate wisdom of the body. And then we have our oil, CBD oil from cannabis or marijuana, and the copaiba oil that I'll talk about in just a second. But let's talk about the cannabis, because, you know, for 5,000 years, cannabis was used as a healing plant. It was used as a fiber, a source of fiber, food, clothes, oil, medicines. And it was outlawed in 1930 from a political agenda. Not because it wasn't safe or effective, but as a political agenda. So these boys from El Paso, Texas, thought that it would be a good way to control the Mexican immigrants by outlawing marijuana. And they took a page out of the playbook of San Francisco from decades earlier when they outlawed opium as a way to control the Chinese immigrants. So I just have a note on the hearings on the marijuana law that was passed in 1930. It claims that marijuana caused men of color to become violent and solicit sex from white women. So again, it wasn't saying it wasn't safe or effective. It was appealing to the emotion of the environment at the time, racism and abuse of women, to pass this law that in the marijuana tax law that was passed in 1937 banned the use and the sales. So again, it was a political agenda. So anytime a law is passed or taken away, I'd ask you to invite and look at what may be the political agenda, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But so marijuana was used. Now we're having marijuana become legal in Canada. And Bill C-45 in June, it was passed in the Senate, and now it has to go to the House of Commons. Apparently, this will allow us to use marijuana from buying from a government source for medicinal purposes. And it will outlaw, at the same time, home cultivation. So I hope this is not a ploy by Big Pharma. I heard a rumor that Monsanto was being taken over by Bayer, and they were looking to have to hold the monopoly on marijuana sales. So I hope this is not another way of getting glyphosate or all these harmful chemicals that Monsanto and Bayer are putting together in a cocktail into us. I hope this is not the political motivation in this Canadian law, and I'm sure that they're going to use organic, non-genetically modified sources, because we are going to demand that as Canadians. We want to be healthy, right? So we have to make sure that it's a non-genetically modified, organic source of your marijuana. And the copaiba, again, is a essential oil, as I mentioned. This is a doTERRA oil that I take and sell. It smells something like, I was going to say my grandmother, but it smells like the cedar balls that you put into your drawer. So it has kind of a woody smell because it's a resin from a tree in South America. And there's many different, it's one of the cannabinoids. And this one study article done by John Levitt, PhD, claims that it affects the copaiba affects the CB1 receptors in the brain and central nervous system, and the CB2 receptors that rest in the endocrine and immune system. So he claims it's better than the CBD oil, their marijuana, one of the components of marijuana. Also, there's another evidence-based complementary study that shows the effect of the copaiba oil resin in treating inflammation and also affecting the nervous system. And I found one part in this study. It says a single intraperineal application 400 milligrams of the copaiba oil resin reduced the damage to motor cortex, which is part of your brain, and neutrophil infiltration, which is the white blood cells. So reduced inflammation, helped repair the nervous system in about 39% of the subjects, even just one day after injury. So there's some promising evidence with this copaiba oil, and you can contact me if you want to know where to get this. Again, this is a doTERRA oil that I take and use and sell. All different effects for that. So then we have the last opioid crisis management is joy. So pain really fuels our purpose. It brings us to a place of humble grace where we're asking for guidance. We have to move out of our pain in order to move into a space, a sacred space, where we can then be open to more of the universe. You know, I showed you that diagram earlier about the biology of pain. Birth, you know, you can use, and it can be a painful, you can look at it and perceive it as a painful stimulus, or some people will look at birth as an orgasmic experience. You can even Google birth as an orgasm, and you can train your mind using hypnosis and hypnobirthing and mindful meditation to see that birth experience almost like an orgasm. So again, finding and utilizing the pain can help fuel your purpose. So Joseph Campbell says, whether pain and pleasure, heaven, hell, you know, these are our psychological constructs that help bring us to a place of poise and grace and balance. It's the pain that drives us out of our limbic system, which is that emotional center that I showed you earlier, and allows us attached to a more executive center. So because we're in pain and we're in a place of humble grace, we have to strive for our sacred space, finding that vessel that is filled then with inspiration, attaching to something greater than ourselves. Our mind and our thoughts are really what controls our destiny. And we've seen that earlier in that diagram, that our mind really controls pain, but there's scientists like Bruce Lipton or Joe Dispenza or Candace Pert. Joe Dispenza talks about, neurons that wire together, fire together. So the more joyful thoughts you can stir up, the more joyful connections you're going to have, the more joyful you are. Bruce Lipton talks about how the epigenetics, things above and beyond the genes, like our thoughts and our environment, can change the permeability of the cell membrane and affect how the cell functions and grows and connects to other cells. And then Candace Pert says, it's our emotions. And when we have an emotion, it delivers a cascade of different chemicals that affects our body and our perception. So the balance of our mind, really the mind shows us, our body is a manifestation of what's happening in our mind, a balanced perception. So joy is a choice. Again, Joseph Campbell says, joy burns out the pain. And James Joyce says, finding your radiance within the filth. You're never going to get away from the pain. In fact, the more you try to get away from the pain, the more you're going to create an opioid crisis, because you're not you're not seeing the purpose in pain. So this video was actually birthed out of a painful place in my own perception, where I was feeling off balance and had to find my sacred space, walking near the ocean, smelling the salt air, lying on the rocks, feeling the earth and the electromagnetic energy from the earth supporting you, and the love of the sun kind of infiltrating you. Whether that's walk in nature, art, music, therapy, whatever it is that pulls you from that monkey mind, that place, the limbic system of emotions, into a higher brain center where you're connecting to humanity and your service, your joy, your purpose, which again is the balance to this opioid crisis. Allowing pain to stimulate further growth. Find your joy within the sorrows of the world. So I want to thank you for watching. You can reach me on our Facebook page at Dr. Dina Churchill, Innovator of Women's Health and Wellness. I have a YouTube channel which you can subscribe to, Dina Churchill. If you're seeing this on Facebook, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. And again, thank you for watching. I'd invite you to reach for the stars, envision and achieve your personal best, and most of all, enjoy the journey. This is Dr. Dina Churchill signing out.